14. Bu Jirajariyawech and Michelle Go. New York City has experienced a shocking surge in violent crime in recent years, and this disturbing trend has shown no signs of slowing down or stopping. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic only furthered the alarming rise in violence, which saw a noticeable uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes. Just days before Thanksgiving in 2021, a 23-year-old Thai model named Bu Jirajariyawech was brutally attacked at the 34th Street Herald Square subway station in Manhattan while waiting for a train late at night. A stranger approached the young woman, put her in a chokehold, and stole her purse. Bu was fortunate enough to survive the attack and used her own experiences as a platform for speaking out against anti-Asian crime several weeks later, in early 2022, when a young Chinese-American woman was killed in a subway attack. The victim, 40-year-old California native Michelle Alyssa Go, was enjoying her new life in the Big Apple. In fact, she wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else, despite all the changes that came with the COVID pandemic, according to her friends. Go was waiting on a platform inside the Times Square subway station when a mentally unstable homeless man shoved her in front of an oncoming train, and sadly, she died from her injuries. The alleged perpetrator, 61-year-old Marshall Simon, was initially charged with murder, but he was ultimately deemed incompetent to stand trial following a court-ordered mental evaluation and was committed to a psychiatric facility indefinitely. That means he'll remain locked up until doctors determine that he's no longer a danger to society. There's no set timeline for when this could happen, though. According to the New York Times, Simon suffers from schizophrenia and had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals for years leading up to the fatal attack on Go. And when he wasn't institutionalized, he was living on the streets. Many were quick to blame his actions on a broken system that failed on two fronts, including when it comes to helping mentally ill members of society and when it comes to preventing hate crimes. Bu Jirajariyawech criticized the authorities for failing to prevent anti-Asian hate crimes in the wake of the unprovoked attack that she was lucky enough to survive. She said that Go's death never should have happened and called for changes, including more action to be taken against the perpetrators of these crimes and the implementation of measures to prevent these horrific attacks from continuing to happen. 13. Rats take over the Big Apple. Anyone who spends significant time in New York City knows that it's impossible to rid the Big Apple of two things: rats and roaches. They run the city, and that'll likely never change. But New York's leaders do their best to at least keep the problem in check by keeping these invasive pest populations at a manageable level. In early 2023, New York City's current mayor, Eric Adams, posted a job listing seeking a so-called rat czar with a killer instinct to help rid the subway system of its burgeoning rodent population. The job offered a generous $170,000 per year salary, and the search for the ideal candidate was reportedly ongoing when video surfaced of a big, fat, nearly kitten-sized rat crawling on a sleeping strap hanger. The gag-inducing footage showed the rat crawling up the man's legs, onto his shoulder, and then behind his head as he snoozed away on an unidentified subway train. After a few seconds, the man awoke to the creepy, crawly critter which caused him to jump. Then the video abruptly ended. If you've lived in New York City, the footage likely doesn't come as a huge surprise. It's no secret that the city's rodents are unafraid of the human population, given the close proximity to people that they live with. But the video was undeniably nauseating and terrifying, regardless of whether or not you're used to the Big Apple's bold-natured rats. 12. Indifferent bystanders refuse to help imperiled strap hanger. One thing you'll learn pretty quick while living in New York City is that people tend to mind their own business. So much so, in fact, that they don't always intervene in a situation even when help is needed. Such was the case for a woman who was attacked on a subway train in footage that surfaced in May of 2022. In the video, a man could be seen targeting random subway riders with his unchecked rage. Most passengers managed to flee to the other side of the train car, but as one woman tried running away, the suspect grabbed her and began terrorizing her. The woman pleaded with bystanders to help, but nobody would. Instead, the crowd ignored her while the suspect pulled her hair and held her down in the seat. A few moments later, the suspect ordered the woman to get up and then shoved her across the car. He then walked away, leaving the traumatized victim in his wake, and continued screaming obscenities and physically trashing his surroundings. And for his finale, he kicked out a window. But the exact date and time of the incident and the train line it occurred on are unclear. An NYPD spokesperson told the Daily Mail that they were looking into the incident but had no comment otherwise, so it's unclear whether the perpetrator was ever identified or held accountable for his actions. 11. Anna Linskaya. A young Asian-American woman was minding her own business on the New York City subway one day in 2018 when she became the target of a hate-filled racist rant simply for bumping into a fellow strap-hanger. People accidentally brush against each other all the time in the Big Apple's densely packed transit system, but 40-year-old Anna Linskaya was unwilling to chalk the incident up to a normal, everyday part of big city life. Instead, she erupted into a tirade, hurling racial slurs and screaming at the victim while beating her with an umbrella and a set of keys. Several bystanders recorded the alarming tantrum, while others attempted to subdue Anna. An Asian American man stepped in front of her to protect the victim, but he was also attacked and targeted with derogatory insults. It apparently wasn't Anna's first subway-related brush with the law either. Just months earlier, she had been arrested for pepper spraying a man in another unprovoked subway attack. She claimed that her alleged victims had attacked her first, and that the footage circulating online failed to show what led up to her behavior that was captured on camera. But nobody seemed to agree, including witnesses who were present during the altercations. Anna originally faced a felony charge for her anti-Asian ambush, but she pleaded guilty to the much lighter charge of misdemeanor menacing. And in what many regard as a miscarriage of justice, the judge overseeing the case sentenced her to 2 years of probation and ordered her to attend just 1 day of anger management. 10. Tokyo subway Sarin attack. One of the most horrific subway incidents in recent memory occurred in the form of 5 coordinated chemical attacks on the Tokyo Metro in March 1995. Led by a man named Shoko Asahara, members of a doomsday cult called Aum Shinrikyo released deadly sarin gas along 3 separate subway lines at the height of the morning rush hour. Developed during the 1930s, sarin is a powerful nerve agent that paralyzes the respiratory system. But in the simplest of terms, it prevents a person from being able to breathe, and the victim suffocates to death. Sarin travels easily and quickly through the air as it dissolves from a liquid into a vapor. It's colorless and odorless, which means that it gives off little to no warning before it begins affecting those who are exposed. When inhaled in lethal amounts, death can occur in as little as 1 to 10 minutes, but the effects of the gas inevitably amount to slow suffering for the victims. Using umbrellas with sharpened tips, the perpetrators punctured packets of sarin along designated platforms throughout Tokyo's rapid transit system. They then exited the stations and fled in waiting getaway cars while the gas permeated subways as they stopped to drop off and pick up passengers. Unsuspecting commuters quickly fell ill in droves as emergency responders scrambled to figure out what was going on and worked to get the situation under control. 13 people died, and more than 6,200 were sickened by the neurotoxic gas. Experts later classified the incident as the largest modern terrorist attack on civilians using a warfare nerve agent. According to some researchers, the effects of the attack were just as much psychological, if not more so than they were physical. While many people legitimately fell ill from the poison itself, some experts have speculated that a large number of victims complained of symptoms reflecting the effects of post-traumatic stress. In other words, many of the panicked passengers who showed up at the hospital later on, rather than in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, suffered from less severe physical symptoms than those who were treated at the emergency room earlier on. According to one study, many people were afraid that they'd been exposed to the sarin gas, even if they couldn't identify any specific physical symptoms. But they were clearly traumatized by what they'd been through, which made their suffering just as valid as anyone else's. The 1995 sarin attacks came on the heels of another terrorist attack perpetrated by the Aum Shinrikyo group the previous year, which killed 8 people and injured nearly 700. Following the 1995 attacks, authorities identified 10 cult members who were responsible for the horror, 5 of whom released the gas and another 5 individuals who acted as getaway drivers. And an 11th individual was found guilty of producing the sarin gas. 7 of the defendants were sentenced to death and executed, while the others were spared from the death penalty in exchange for their cooperation. The most recent executions occurred in 2018, after the remaining death penalty defendants exhausted all their appeals. Only one person was acquitted of charges for their participation in the manufacturing of the sarin gas. Naoko Kichuki, who was 24 years old at the time of the attacks, was arrested for her involvement in the chemicals production in 2012 after an inside source tipped off law enforcement. However, the case against her was dismissed 3 years later, after she sufficiently proved that she was unaware of the planned attacks. 9. PreHoliday Horror. Just days before Christmas in 2022, a New York City subway train struck 2 people while pulling into the 6th Avenue station. The train then proceeded onward as if nothing had happened, leaving a trail of blood and body parts in its wake. Both victims died from their injuries, and footage of the collision's aftermath was so gruesome that news stations couldn't show it without blurring out significant portions of the imagery. And to make matters even worse, the next train pulled into the station, apparently unaware of the horror that had just occurred, and ran right over the victims' bodies. Passengers had no choice but to walk through pools of blood on the platform as they exited the train. Strap hanger Sarah Lang, who was on her way to work when the horrific incident occurred, told local station WSAZ that one man didn't even realize he was stepping in blood until she pointed it out to him. She gave a graphic description of what she witnessed, including the victim's brain matter, and said that it looked as though the victims' bodies had exploded. Lang was so shocked by what she saw that she took a video of it just to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. And she acknowledged that it's typical for New Yorkers to go about their day while ignoring their surroundings. But she also mentioned that it took just a few fleeting moments for her to realize that something terrible had happened. A source with inside information later confirmed to the news outlet that not 1, but 2 subsequent trains ran over the bodies. The tipster claimed that this happened due to confusion from 911 callers about the location of the collision. But once law enforcement finally located the scene of the crash, train traffic ground to a halt. And of course by then, the damage to the bodies was already unspeakably disturbing. According to police, the victims included a 44-year-old man and a 63-year-old woman who were struck at around 10:30 a.m. Shortly after the tragedy, New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced that the deaths didn't appear to be criminal in nature, but were instead the result of an unfortunate and tragic accident. 8. Philadelphia subway crash. When Americans think of subways, they almost always automatically think of the New York City rapid transit system, which is only natural after all, since it's the largest and most heavily used rapid transit system of its kind in the country. But subway trains are commonly used in other densely populated urban centers throughout the nation, including in and around Philadelphia, where commuters rely heavily on both regional and local trains in their daily travels. Philly's rapid transit system experienced one of the most severe and tragic disruptions in its history in early 1990, when the rear 3 cars of a 6-car subway train derailed in the middle of a downtown tunnel. At least 3 people were killed and 150 or more were injured, including 6 passengers who were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. On a lighter note though, everyone in the undamaged front 3 cars walked away from the accident mostly unscathed. Drexel University senior Charles A. Zimmerman, who was riding in one of the undamaged cars, told the New York Times that the train was traveling at roughly 25 miles per hour when it suddenly began to jerk. He said that it felt like the normal type of jerking that most subway riders get used to experiencing from time to time, but then the train suddenly stopped. It wasn't until about 10 minutes later, when Zimmerman and other passengers were escorted out of the undamaged cars, that they realized how serious the accident was. In his own words, he described seeing the one car hanging off the tracks, while the one behind it had wrapped itself around several pillars. Other witnesses gave similar accounts, with some even saying that the most heavily damaged car was nearly split in half by the pillar it crashed into. Rescue workers had to use the jaws of life to cut through the mangled vehicles in order to reach the victims trapped in the wreckage. The train's engineer, Stephen Young, had no idea what caused the accident. He claimed that the subway suddenly veered to the left and said that he was grateful to have survived the ordeal, especially after he saw one passenger die right before his eyes. Investigators initially suspected that the crash was caused by a dragging power box, and they ultimately concluded that a loose bolt beneath the third subway car had caused an electric motor to drag along the tracks. The derailment occurred as a result of the motor colliding with a rail switch. There was a backup system meant to keep the motor in place, but that also failed, and it was unclear why, according to safety officials, who seemed somewhat baffled by the ordeal despite their lengthy investigation into the cause of the accident. And what was even more shocking was the fact that the faulty motor had recently passed through 2 routine inspections. Thankfully though, no accidents of this magnitude have occurred on the Philadelphia subway system in the more than 30 years since the horrific tragedy. 7. Hate on the DC Metro. Tensions between pro-Israel and pro-Palestine civilians in the United States have reached a fever pitch since the ongoing war in Gaza broke out in early October 2023. In mid-November, a trio of Jewish teenagers were targeted in a vicious onslaught of hatred while riding the Washington, D.C. Metro. Shira Rouhani, Leah Applebaum, and Leah Borenstein traveled to the nation's capital from New York City with a teacher from their school in Queens to attend a pro-Israel rally. They were riding the subway when an unidentified woman began hurling insults and allegations at the women. The offending party called the trio effing disgusting and stupid and accused them of being pro-genocide, leaving the teens feeling scared for their safety. Then, in a video captured by Miss Rouhani, the person yelling at the girls could be heard saying that they supported the killing of innocent people. Leah Borenstein told the New York Post that the interaction reduced her to tears and left her feeling scared of the woman who targeted her and her friends in the verbal attack. She accused the woman of calling her and the 2 other teens fat and ugly and dirty pigs, and assuming that they lived rich and privileged lives. Speaking with the Post, Rouhani admitted that she had hesitated to attend the rally due to the noticeable rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, including in New York City. She even claimed that some of her peers had resorted to calling Ubers instead of taking public transportation in order to avoid conflict with strangers. Despite the alarming incident, however, Rouhani said that she was glad she attended the rally. She said that she and her friends felt safe until they were riding the subway and were targeted because she had an Israeli flag draped over her shoulders. In a perfect world, people would find less confrontational ways to work out their differences. But it's not a perfect world, and the Israel-Palestine conflict is an especially touchy and divisive topic. Unfortunately, incidents like this will likely continue to happen for the foreseeable future, leaving people on both sides of the issue with the decision of whether to keep their thoughts to themselves or to vocalize their feelings in support of their viewpoints. 6. Baku Metro fire. On October 28, 1995, a jam-packed 5-car subway train caught fire between 2 stations in Azerbaijan's capital city of Baku. It happened during the evening rush hour, and nearly 300 of the 1,000 people aboard lost their lives. The emergency began when passengers started to notice the smell of smoke. White smoke began pouring into the train, and the train stalled more than 650 feet from the nearest station. Panicked passengers scrambled to escape in the pitch dark as black smoke began to fill the tunnel. The doors on at least one car became jammed shut, further choking the evacuation process. And to make matters even more dire, the burning materials emitted carbon dioxide into the air, threatening to kill everyone nearby. Those who managed to escape the train initially headed on foot toward the next station along the road, Nariman-Narimanov, which was 1.3 miles away. And as people stumbled aimlessly in the pitch darkness, several individuals grabbed the electrified rail and were shocked to death by a fatal dosage of electricity. Before many could reach safety, the ventilation system switched into exhaust mode, sending the smoke in the exact direction most people were fleeing in. So some passengers rushed the other way in hopes of reaching the next closest station at Ulduz. Emergency workers were dispatched to Ulduz, but they were unable to enter the smoke-filled tunnels and could only help those who managed to reach the platform. Meanwhile, no responders were sent to Narimanov, leaving survivors there to fend for themselves. Sources estimate the death toll at anywhere between 289 and 337. Either way, it was the deadliest subway accident in world history. At least 260 bodies were found inside the burned-out train, while dozens of others, including 3 emergency responders, were found in the tunnel. Most lost their lives from carbon monoxide poisoning, but some were crushed to death in the race to escape the train, and hundreds of others were hospitalized. To this day, rumors claim that the subway might have been sabotaged in an act of terrorism, but the fire was ultimately blamed on an electrical failure. 5. Subway surfing tragedies. The act of standing atop moving subway cars, known as subway surfing, has become increasingly popular among teenagers in recent years. And even though a lot of people have died doing it, the problem is only getting worse thanks to social media, which is serving as a platform for young people to show off their daring and dangerous behavior. In one of the more recent subway surfing tragedies to occur in the United States, a young man named Jay Thiruvannapuram died in an accident along Washington, D.C.'s metro rail system. The teen's lifeless body was found near the tracks at the Rhode Island Avenue station. Just moments before he was killed, Jay filmed himself surfing atop the subway car, and a closer look at his phone and social media activity revealed a huge adoration for subway surfers. It was clear that the youngster idolized fellow youths who participated in this hazardous pastime. In one exchange over text message, the young man praised a popular subway surfer from New York City. Jay acknowledged that subway surfing was dangerous, but said that it was the only way he felt alive. Ironically though, it was the teen's pursuit of this feeling that cost him his life. After the tragedy, his parents revealed that their son's behavior had become increasingly risky in the months leading up to his death. Therapy did little in the way of harm reduction, and like many of people his age, Jay seemed to place a high priority on his goal of achieving internet fame. In hopes of preventing similar deaths, Jay's parents called for more action to be taken to stop teens from participating in the dangerous subway surfing trend. They acknowledged that there are limits on what parents can do to stop these tragedies from happening, and said that social media platforms have a responsibility to remove subway surfing videos. The devastated parents also called on transit companies to do their part in curbing the trend. 4. The Union Square derailment. 5 people died and nearly 200 others were injured in August 1991 when a New York City subway train derailed inside the Union Square station in Manhattan. It was the city's worst subway accident in over 60 years. 38-year-old engineer Robert E. Ray was behind the controls that night. It was his final shift of the week, and it didn't get off to a smooth start. According to the New York Times, he'd arrived home that morning from his previous shift and drank until he went to sleep at 3 p.m. Ray allegedly had a few more drinks that night before taking a taxi to work and arriving late, which had apparently become a habit. Just an hour into his shift, Ray's train careened into the Union Square station at a far greater speed than the curved tracks were built to handle. The train crumpled like a soda can and made such a mess that the track was out of service for nearly a week afterward. According to reports, Ray was driving the train erratically in the time leading up to the crash. There was construction going on at Union Square, requiring motormen working along the train line to slow down to 10 miles per hour and switch to an alternate track as they passed through the tunnel. Ray failed to do this though, and according to reporters, sped through the tunnel at breakneck speed. It was only after the tragic accident that Ray's alleged drinking problem finally came to light. More than 12 hours after the accident, his blood alcohol level tested at 0.21, over 2.5 times the legal limit for driving a car. Authorities charged the disgraced driver with multiple counts of second-degree murder. But he maintained his innocence, despite prosecutors' claims that he showed obvious signs of drunkenness that should have disqualified him from operating a train that night. According to the state, Ray's eyes were bloodshot and he went to work wearing sneakers, which violated the dress code requiring hard-soled shoes. He overshot the track in at least 2 stations and he was repeatedly warned to slow down. Despite these warning signs though, nobody stopped Ray from continuing to drive the subway that night, and he argued through his lawyer that the blood alcohol results were the result of his drinking after the accident. But Ray later admitted that he'd drunk heavily before his shift because he was depressed about some things going on in his personal life, and he confessed to falling asleep right before the accident. A jury acquitted the former motorman of murder, but found him guilty of reduced manslaughter charges in connection with the 5 deaths, as well as assault in connection with 26 of the most severely injured passengers. As a result, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the manslaughter counts, plus 1 to 7 years for the assault convictions. The tragedy led to significant changes in the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's protocols. Most notably, the agency announced that it would begin performing random checks on its train engineers and bus drivers to ensure that they're in an appropriate condition to drive at all times. 3. Isaiah Colasso. While riding the New York City subway through Brooklyn one night in April 2023, 18-year-old Isaiah Colasso got into an argument with a 25-year-old fellow strap hanger named Mark Smith. According to witnesses, one of Colasso's friends had pulled the train's emergency brake, angering Smith, who confronted the friend. Colasso then stepped in to try de-escalating the situation, but the disagreement apparently only became more heated. The fight quickly became physical and ended with Colasso being fatally stabbed. Smith fled the scene, but later turned himself into the police several days later. He was charged with manslaughter, assault, and possession of a weapon. And in a jailhouse interview with the New York Daily News, Smith said that he deeply regretted what happened and wished he could take it all back. He claimed that he didn't mean to stab Colasso and that he's a good person who acted in self-defense. The judge initially set Smith's bail at $60,000, but reduced it to $20,000 after learning that Colasso's friends allegedly text messaged each other to get their story straight before talking to the police. Smith's lawyer said that his client is maintaining his innocence and discouraged the public against rushing to judgment based on sensationalized tabloid reporting. A grand jury eventually dismissed charges against Colasso a month after the deadly encounter, when they determined that he did, in fact, act in self-defense. 2. OHare station crash. It's not entirely unheard of for trains to derail along Chicago's elevated system, also known as the L, which consists of 8 lines and is the country's second busiest rapid transit system. According to NBC5 Chicago, 27 derailments occurred between 2009 and 2019. Most of these incidents are minor, but every now and then passengers are seriously injured or worse. One of the most major accidents in recent years occurred in 2014 when a train engineer fell asleep at the controls and overshot the track at the OHare airport station. The 8-car train was traveling noticeably faster than the usual few miles per hour that trains typically move at while pulling into a station, but it wasn't going insanely fast. It nevertheless crashed hard enough for the front car to barrel partially up an escalator before coming to a complete stop. Damages to the station and train totaled nearly $11.2 million, and the Chicago Transit Authority paid out millions in lawsuit damages. 34 people were injured in the collision, but luckily nobody died. The train's driver, Brittany Tysheka Haywood, admitted to falling asleep on the job and mentioned that she had been working a lot of overtime. Just a month earlier, she had overshot the tracks at another station, but without any major damages to the train she was operating. While Haywood had previously denied falling asleep during the first incident, it became pretty clear that this was likely what happened in both cases. A National Transportation Safety Board investigation recommended that the CTA and other transit agencies across the US make it a priority to better address the seemingly ongoing problem of driver fatigue.
And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed.
1. The Loop Crash of 1977. The Chicago Elevated Transit System's worst accident of all time happened in early 1977 when 2 trains collided during the evening rush hour on a Friday in the city's busy Loop district. At the time, trains traveling in both directions often shared a single track, and to avoid a collision, engineers typically obeyed signals and commands. In this particular case, however, a train driver barreled past stop signals and rammed into the back of another train along a curve. Passengers riding in the rear of the train later said that the impact didn't feel major, likely because the train was only moving at about 10 miles per hour at the time of the crash. But the driver never stopped accelerating, causing the train to continue pushing forward despite being pinned against the vehicle in front of it. The force caused the rear train to fold, and as a result, the first 3 cars fell off the track. The first car landed on a track support structure, while the second and third plunged straight to the ground below, and a 4th car dangled precariously off the track's edge. As a result, 11 people were killed and 268 others were injured in the terrifying crash. Safety officials blamed the train's operator, Stefan Martin, for the collision. He reportedly had a poor safety record, and while it's unclear exactly what caused him to carry out the maneuvers that led to the accident, distraction appeared to be a main factor leading to his catastrophic lapse in judgment. In what appeared to be a moment of panic after the initial collision, Martin pushed forward on the controller, causing the ensuing derailment. Following the crash, the CTA banned train engineers from overriding signals without obtaining permission from signal operators first. And in the years since, trains that once shared tracks along the loop have been separated to further reduce the risk of another deadly accident.
Number 12. Stolen PlayStation leads to stabbing. When Jake Bellotta's PlayStation disappeared in 2018, he suspected his former roommate, Joshua Barnes, of stealing the console. Barnes had recently been evicted for non-payment of rent and had left the front door to the apartment in Maitland, Florida unlocked when he moved out. Bellotta was angry about it, and he also suspected Barnes of breaking back into the unit and taking the PlayStation, along with a bong and a weed scale. A third roommate, Ian McClurg, would later tell authorities that Bellotta was beyond pissed about the alleged theft. In fact, he was so mad he supposedly punched a hole in the wall. But Bellotta's anger didn't end there. Adding to his outrage was the fact that Barnes was reportedly bragging to others about stealing the PlayStation, and because Bellotta was now worried that others would break into the apartment. According to McClurg, he was also intent on getting his missing property back and devised a plan to lure Barnes to the residence. Bellotta allegedly invited his former roommate to a made-up event and promised that there would be women there. When Barnes arrived at the apartment, Bellotta stabbed him 17 times while McClurg watched. Before Bellotta and McClurg could wrap the victim's body up in garbage bags like they planned, their new roommate arrived home and dialed 911 as soon as he saw the carnage inside. In a chilling recording of the call, the unnamed roommate told the dispatcher that there had been a homicide at his home and that he knew there were ongoing problems between the suspects and the victim, but that he didn't know exactly what happened because he had just arrived home. When the dispatcher asked him how he knew Barnes was dead, he said that the victim was laying on top of a plastic bag and not moving. The terrified caller also expressed his fear that the perpetrators would do something to hurt him and his girlfriend. Officers found McClurg in the bathroom and they apprehended Bellotta in a shopping plaza parking lot. Bellotta told the responding cops that Barnes was the aggressor and that he killed the victim in self-defense. But his story didn't hold up in court. He was convicted of murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. McClurg pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence and was sentenced to 10 years behind bars. Number 11. Drunk driver destroys his own family. Just weeks into the 2023 new year, a speeding car struck a barrier along a Staten Island highway during the early morning hours. The vehicle then slammed into a utility pole and a brick wall with such force that it broke into 3 pieces. It was so mangled it was barely recognizable. The driver, 30-year-old Adam Nikizic, was seriously injured. His pregnant 23-year-old fiancée, Adriana Silmatage, was also injured and launched from the passenger seat. She and the couple's unborn baby lost their lives. A responding officer had to cut Nikizic out from his seatbelt. He allegedly told the cop that another vehicle cut him off, but according to a police report, he was unsteady on his feet, his speech was slurred, and he reeked of booze. Nikizic was unaware of the deaths of Silmatage and the baby when he was wheeled into a courtroom a few days later in a hospital gown. He learned the horrific news that day when he was arraigned on manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, vehicular assault, and drunk driving charges. When he realized the extent of the tragedy, Nikizic broke down in tears, but his problems were just beginning. In late February, about a month after the wreck, a grand jury indicted him on a slew of upgraded charges, including depraved indifference murder and aggravated vehicular homicide. According to the indictment, Nikizic had a blood alcohol level of more than 0.18 on the day of the accident, more than twice the legal limit for driving in the state. It's rare for a murder charge to result from a drunk driving fatality, according to the New York Daily News, but prosecutors sometimes resort to the charge in cases where the driver was so reckless that they showed a complete disregard for human life. If convicted, Nikizic could face 15 years to life in prison. Number 10. Home buyer resorts to arson to avoid purchasing house. John Pfeiffer Jr. had already committed to buying a $400,000 house in Newtown Township, Pennsylvania in 2014 when he realized that he couldn't afford it. In fact, he was more than aware of the fact that he lacked the resources to purchase the home. And instead of owning up to it, he entered the final negotiating stages with the owners and realtor, claiming that he planned to pay cash for the property. During the last night in their home before they planned to hand the keys over to Pfeiffer, the owners overheard what sounded like someone trying to break in. They called the police, who found Pfeiffer nearby in his vehicle. He claimed he was just driving around to familiarize himself with the area and agreed to go down to the police station for questioning. Officers performed a routine search of Pfeiffer and found a lighter, latex gloves, and other implements indicating that he was planning to commit an arson. In his vehicle, they found lighter fluid, hickory chips, and more latex gloves. He allegedly said the items were for a planned cookout, but his wife told the police that there was no planned cookout. Investigators concluded that Pfeiffer initially planned to pay for the house with a fraudulent cashier's check. Instead, he settled on burning it down to avoid following through with a deal that he knew he couldn't honor. His wife was just as unaware of this as she was about the alleged cookout. She told officers that just weeks earlier, Pfeiffer moved a family out of their home, claiming it was mold-infested, only to discover that they had been evicted for not paying rent. Pfeiffer told his wife that his parents had loaned him the money to buy the new house with. He was charged with burglary and other felony offenses in connection with the incident. Number 9. Former cop turns to burglary. Janelle Garrick was working as a sheriff's deputy in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, when she was busted for burglarizing people's homes while they were at their loved ones' funerals in 2018. According to authorities, she planned the crimes ahead of time by reading the obituaries, researching the deceased relatives, and figuring out where they lived. Knowing they would most likely be saying their final goodbyes at the person's service, she made her move. She was reportedly captured committing at least one home break-in on doorbell camera footage. Garrick was fired from her job and arrested the following year, but she apparently didn't learn her lesson. While she was out on bond for her pending charges, she was allegedly caught burglarizing yet another home about 60 miles, 96 kilometers west of Milwaukee. In this particular case, she was accused of stealing narcotic painkillers. Detectives connected Garrick to at least 6 burglaries through fingerprints on evidence left behind at the scenes. The prosecutor asked the judge for a 1-year prison sentence, but in a rare move, he imposed a harsher 2-year sentence followed by 3 years of probation. Garrick blamed her actions on her opioid addiction and agreed that she deserved punishment, but said that she felt she needed more help than was being offered. As they say though, do the crime, do the time. Number 8. Bride almost drowns on her wedding day. For reasons that aren't fully known, a bride jumped off a boat and into some water on her wedding day in 2017 and nearly drowned under the weight of her gown. Her photographer was there to capture the moment on camera, but instead of the memorable snapshot she was likely hoping for, she got stuck under the heavy, multi-layered dress. 5 bystanders jumped in to rescue her, but the trapped bride spent nearly half a minute enveloped by her attire before she was freed. It's unclear where the botched photo op occurred, but the Daily Mail speculated that it happened somewhere in the United States. Sadly, what seemed like a beautiful moment quickly turned into a nightmare, but luckily the newlywed emerged from the ordeal alive. Number 7. Botched break-in. A homeowner in Lake Seminole, Florida, awoke early in the morning one day in 2022 to someone trying to break into their house. They discovered a woman unlocking the front door after smashing through its window with a hammer, causing an estimated $400 in damages. Prepared to do whatever it took to protect themselves and their residence, the homeowner confronted the intruder with a gun and told her to leave. Jackson County deputies responded to the residence after receiving a call about a suspicious female, possibly under the influence of drugs, walking around the area. They identified the suspect as a 35-year-old New Mexico woman named Amber Montoya, who reportedly has a lengthy criminal history spanning 5 states. She was charged with burglary and criminal mischief. Jackson County Sheriff Donald Edenfield used the incident as an opportunity to remind the public that this type of behavior won't be tolerated and encouraged residents to defend themselves and their property by any means necessary. Number 6. Cat burglars get captured. A homeowner arrived at her residence in Indian River County, Florida one day in 2019 and was immediately put off when her pet cat didn't rush over to greet her like usual. She then noticed that her $1,200 flat-screen TV was missing and called 911 to report the burglary. Footage from a neighbor's surveillance camera showed the intruders entering the woman's home and leaving with the cat and the TV. The suspects were later identified as 32-year-old Martavis Owens and 32-year-old Nicole Marie White of Vero Beach. A deputy visited White and asked about the stolen property, and she admitted that she and Owens had sold the TV at a pawn shop. She still had the cat and a jewelry box that she stole from the victim, and she gave both to the deputy after admitting that the theft was a dumb idea. Authorities charged White and Owens with dealing in stolen property, giving false information to a pawnbroker, grand theft, and burglary. The arrests came just a year after the pair were nabbed during a traffic stop, along with a third suspect for drug and gun charges. Hopefully, since then, they've squared away their legal issues and have stayed out of trouble. Number 5. Reality TV stars rescued from deadly heat. One sweltering hot summer day in 2022, 8 women went to Camelback Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona to film themselves on a hike for a religious reality show called Bad Girls Gone God. Temperatures soared to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius, and it wasn't long before the group became wildly uncomfortable. To say they were unprepared for the strenuous nature walk on Echo Canyon Trail would be an understatement. Cast member Kristen Livingston later told local station KPHO that the group was unaware that the planned walk was along one of Phoenix's most challenging trails. It's true, there's even a Facebook group called Please Don't Die or Have to Be Rescued on Camelback Mountain, Arizona, which is designed to warn people of the dangers associated with the trail. The ladies began the hike at around 7 o'clock in the morning, with each participant carrying just a single bottle of water for the day. By noon, they had broken up into several groups, with some forging on ahead, while others lagged behind. At that point, the women realized they were in danger due to the excruciating heat and their lack of preparedness. Thanks to their decision to promptly call for help, they all survived. Some of the participants were wheeled down the mountain, while others were lifted to safety via helicopter, and 3 of the rescued individuals were hospitalized in stable condition. Number 4. Mom quits parenting. Deputies from the Anderson County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina received an alarming call in June of 2022 when a boater spotted 3 unsupervised teenage siblings on Cemetery Island, locally known as Ghost Island. The kids reportedly said that they camped on the island the night before with their mother, Courtney Taylor, and her boyfriend, Eric Elrod. They told authorities that the adults said they were going to get water earlier that day, but never returned. Their vehicle was gone from its parking spot on the mainland. The sheriff's office initially considered Taylor a missing person and posted her photo online, along with an appeal to the public for information regarding her possible whereabouts. Elrod was also considered missing at first. Deputies eventually located the missing couple's vehicle. At some point, they determined that even though Taylor was nowhere to be found, she most likely wasn't in danger. They soon learned that she had allegedly been in contact with her ex-husband, who had taken the children into his car, and that she was seen in the area. Deputies picked Taylor up and charged her with 3 counts of child neglect. At the time the story broke, Elrod was still on the run and was wanted on suspicion of distributing methamphetamine. Number 3. Shoplifting with a cop. Every holiday season, it seems as though at least one person in the United States makes news headlines for being arrested for theft during a Shop with a Cop event, which are designed to bring law enforcement and local communities closer together. In late 2022, that honor went to a man named Brad, who was busted for allegedly stealing from a Walmart store in St. Cloud, Florida. According to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, there were around 40 deputies present at the event, as well as a forensic team, a community service team, and Sheriff Marcos Lopez himself. In a Facebook post featuring a photo of the suspect, the agency described the alleged crime as a bad idea, and further wrote, "Seriously, we just can't make this up." Around the same time, another pair of suspects, Robert Crabtree and Amber Boyd, were nabbed at a similar event at a Meijer store in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Around 50 members of the Clark County Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies were present when they had to stop what they were doing to arrest Crabtree, who was allegedly caught stealing in the middle of the act. Boyd was arrested about 45 minutes later as officers were checking out at the registers with their shoppers. Another noteworthy Shop with a Cop arrest came in 2018 during an event at a Target store in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Some of the 15 cops who were in attendance noticed 2 women allegedly attempting to leave the store with a shopping cart containing around $1,900 worth of electronics that weren't paid for. Officers caught up with the pair, later identified as 18-year-old Dana Johnson and 40-year-old Kiana Wilson, and took them into custody on suspicion of felony retail fraud. Unfortunately, these examples weren't the first, and they certainly won't be the last of people trying to get away with blatant theft during Shop with a Cop events. Number 2. Hiking across the Bering Strait. In early 2006, a British national named Carl Bushby and an American citizen named Dmitry Kiefer set out to cross a frozen portion of the Bering Strait. This is a body of water that separates Alaska from Russia's Far East. Aside from the obvious dangers of the arduous trek across the 56-mile, 90-kilometer stretch of ice, the pair apparently failed to consider the issues they might have with Russian immigration authorities if they actually reached their destination. The hike was successful, and as one might predict, Bushby and Kiefer encountered problems after reaching Siberia. According to border security spokesperson Andrei Orlov, 2 men were arrested in Chukotka province for failing to register with the authorities, something they were required to do within 3 days of arriving, even if they had visas. While Orlov declined to specifically name the individuals who were arrested, it was pretty clear, based on the circumstances, that the men in question were Kiefer and Bushby. The timing also aligned with a blog entry on Bushby's website, which described how the pair reached Russia after 15 days of hiking. According to the site, Bushby crossed the Bering Strait as part of a round-the-world hike that he started 8 years earlier in 1998. His father, Keith Bushby, confirmed to the press that Bushby and Kiefer were detained shortly after their arrival in Russian territory. Bushby's last blog entry before he and Kiefer were nabbed by authorities stated that the two were in the village of Uelen, which is located near the point where the Chukchi Sea and the Bering Sea meet. He wrote that they were on their way to a city further down the coast to register with authorities. But the authorities evidently found them first, and because they did not enter the country at an official border crossing, their passports weren't stamped. Keith Bushby told the Associated Press that the incident didn't come as a total surprise to the travelers. In fact, they expected it, since they knew they would be entering a country at a very remote point with no designated entry point. But he said that if Russian officials denied the men permission to continue, it would unfortunately cut his son's journey short, which he hoped wouldn't happen. Luckily, a Russian appeals court ultimately gave them permission to continue after the British Prime Ministers and the governor of Chukotka got involved. Number 1. Government blamed for preventable disaster. In early March of 2023, parts of California were hammered by heavy rains that led to catastrophic flooding, leaving entire neighborhoods submerged and countless civilians stranded. Along the Pajaro River in Monterey County, a levee broke from the force of the overflowing water and inundated the farming town of Pajaro. Shortly after the disaster, rumors began to swirl about how authorities had long known of the levee's potential to break. They allegedly chose not to take any action to fix it because Pajaro was simply too poor for the government to care. In the words of the Los Angeles Times, officials didn't think it made financial sense to prioritize levee repairs to protect the low-income area. So what did they do? Absolutely nothing. Stu Townsley of the US Army Corps of Engineers told the Times that it was known by the early 1960s that the levees were probably not adequate for the water that the system gets. And experts revisited the matter several times over the years, but things never turned out favorably for Pajaro's residents in terms of benefit-cost ratios. According to an Army Corps web page dated to 2021, the outdated levee system was built in 1949. Since then, severe flooding has hit Pajaro on at least 5 occasions, including in 1995, when floodwaters breached the levees and caused 2 drowning deaths, along with an estimated $50 to $95 million in damages. Still, nothing was done to make the town safer. Pajaro was flooded again in 1997 and 1998, at which point then-President Bill Clinton issued a disaster declaration. Yet again, nothing was done. In January 2023, just a few months before the most recent flooding event, Pajaro's residents were evacuated for an entire week due to the risk of flooding. This, unfortunately, isn't surprising. As Monterey County Supervisor Luis Alejo pointed out, low-income neighborhoods and communities have always historically been ignored by state and federal governments. Sadly, it took repeated catastrophes for leaders to finally decide that it's a good idea to build a new levee system that can withstand the forces of nature.
Would you rather be trapped on a stalled subway train in the dark for several hours or a crowded elevator? Why would one be worse than the other? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.